Dig. This video is going to pain me to make, and not in a funny way like a Wes Briscoe special. I might enjoy making the first half of this video, but as it progresses, I'm going to sink lower and lower. I admit I've been putting this video off. What you've all been asking me to make a video on is not something I've been looking forward to making a video on. Because what you're asking me to make a video on is James Storm, wrestling's biggest missed opportunity. James Storm is my favourite wrestler, and from the sounds of it, a lot of you really like him too. So I hope in this video I do James Storm's career a good service and adequately communicate what a missed opportunity James Storm really was to pro wrestling. I wouldn't normally make a video on a wrestler's career, but for the Cowboy I'll make an exception. Before we start, I just want to give out to my new supporters over on Patreon who have been catching the exclusive episodes of the Hulk Hogan show, so let's get into it. James Storm was a legit country boy from a small village called Leapers Fork in Tennessee. Storm lived his redneck gimmick and beers would often accompany him wherever he went, and even his finisher was called the Last Call Superkick. Little did Storm know how much negativity his boozing would cause him later in his career. He cut his promos in a thick southern accent and he was a bit like a fun-loving version of Stone Cold Steve Austin. He was a wrestler who seemed to be goofing off in everything he did. He just seemed like a normal guy who'd kick your butt. He would also prove that he could play a serious wrestler as well when the time called, and of course his famous catchphrase,
"Sorry about your damn luck."
James Storm lost his father when he was 12 years old, and Storm was also pursuing a career in basketball when he was younger, but he had to stop due to a shoulder injury. Storm got his first break competing for WCW as a jobber and mainly featured on their B show WCW Worldwide in 2000. His future partner Chris Harris was also there. Obviously this didn't really come to anything, as WCW was not long for this world. When WCW went under in 2001, Storm's contract was not picked up by the WWF, and he was forced to go back onto the independent wrestling scene. Storm and Harris would soon be hired for the new promotion NWA TNA after a well-received match against each other. They both competed on the first episode of NWA TNA, but not as a team. Storm seems to be taking his cowboy gimmick a little bit more serious at the start. Look at those cute little pistols. He is the Cowboy James Storm. By the second episode of NWA TNA, the band was formally put together as Storm and Harris took on the Rainbow Express and other cringe-worthy tag teams like the Hot Shots, who are more interested in squeezing their genitalia than wrestling. The name America's Most Wanted apparently comes from James Storm's trouble with the law. I wonder what sort of trouble he was in. Probably the sort of trouble you get in after one too many beers at Weatherspoons on a Friday night. Early in the run, Harris didn't seem to be a fan of James Storm's over-the-top cowboy gimmick, and he was always moaning about Storm and his pistols.
This whole cowboy gimmick sucks. Nobody cares anymore. No more of this Stan Hansen crap, okay? Alright, we need to concentrate. Do not bring those cap guns to the ring with you tonight.
Cap guns? What are you talking about, cap guns? Woo! It's going down in Tulsa tonight!
They won their first NWA Tag Team Championship in September 2002 in a match for the vacant belts. They were the second team in TNA to hold the belts, after AJ Styles and Jerry Lynn. When Storm and Harris won the belts, the titles were vacant as Vince Russo had stripped AJ and Lynn. I've definitely heard that line before. AMW would go on to be one of the most successful tag teams in TNA history. They beat all comers that challenged them. TNA could be seen testing the waters early on with Harris as a singles competitor, as several times during the AMW run it looked like they had more faith in Harris than Storm. They turned AMW heel after a while and sided them with Jeff Jarrett and his Plarrett Jarrett faction, and they were managed by Gail Kim, who would stick with them throughout their run. Their feud with Team 3D led to the infamous Team 3D funeral parlour segment. The funeral parlour was later used in the Aces and Eights funeral. I guess TNA had a deal with a funeral home who took care of their dead wrestlers. This was the low point in Storm's run as he blended into the faction and it was hard for anyone to stand out other than Jeff Jarrett. They often teased splitting up the AMW, but they didn't go through with it due to fan backlash. Storm would end up winning the NWA tag belts a record 7 times and held the belts for a combined 517 days. Storm would also briefly hold the belt with Christopher Daniels as his partner. AMW's best match that I will get screamed at if I don't mention was versus Triple X in 2004 in a cage, where Elix Skipper is responsible for one of the most memorable moments in TNA history with his cage walk, and the whole match was just great in general. Anyway, the breakup of America's Most Wanted would eventually come in late 2006, after Storm deliberately hit Harris with a beer bottle, causing the team to disband. This moment would come back to haunt Storm time and time again. This moment should have been a sobering one for Storm, but he didn't learn. Storm's beer bottle attack would leave Harris temporarily blinded, and he would have to wear an eye patch on TV that made him look stupid. Storm would boast that he ended Chris Harris's career. Gail Kim would not approve of Storm's actions, and Storm would have to bring in a new manager, Miss Tennessee Jacqueline Moore. It was around this time that Storm started to show a bit more character. He was now playing a fully fledged heel, and TNA decided to up his beer drinking antics more and more, as he made fun of the TNA geeks.
Looky, 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 Miss Tennessee. Look, everybody, Eric Young, Bob Roberts. Price check on condom, please. Price check. I got the condom, sorry. You two boys go and have a good time, all right? Eric Young, Bonnie Roberts. I've seen it all now.
This has been the most embarrassing night of my life. I want to copy that tape.
Bye, James.
Bye!
James Storm would embark on a winning streak for over half a year, whilst Harris was sat at home blinded. When Harris did eventually return to TNA, the two fought in one of the worst matches in TNA history, a blindfold match, but it was more like a bag over the head job. I'm sure some of you can relate to that. The two redeemed themselves in an excellent Texas death match with Harris coming out victorious on the next pay-per-view. After this, Storm would embark on the best feud of his career as he clashed with Rhino. It would turn out that Rhino was a recovering alcoholic, and Storm taunted him over this, pouring beer into his mouth at every chance that he could. There was vignettes for weeks of Storm travelling around local bars trying to find Rhino, with Storm seemingly more and more out of it after each bar visit. These segments were the highlight of the TNA show at the time, and everyone looked forward to seeing them. Storm's character was really shining through. You never knew with Storm if he was actually playing the part of a drunk or if he actually really was drunk.
Well, maybe he should go to AAA.
What does the Auto Club have to do with any of this?
Oh, yeah. Well, they can drive him to them AA meetings, because AA's for quitters. And I'm not a quitter, I'm a winner.
Rhino seemed to be on top in the feud, but then he was taken off TV injured. Storm then introduced his very own belt, the World Beer Drinking Championship, which was a John Cena belt with beer bottles stuck to it. He would compete against Eric Young in a series of drink-related matches. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Never Have I Ever. Well, this was part of it. The two would trade the championship back and forth until Rhino returned in spring 2008 and destroyed the title and started the feud back up with Storm. James Storm would continue to be featured in weird matches, as he lost to Rhino in an Elevation X match. It's basically just a scaffold match, first one to be pushed off loses. Storm still managed to make this match entertaining, as he tried to hide inside the structure and drink his beer in peace. He ends up losing the match, however, proving for the first time that he should lay off the beers. Shortly after this, Storm would start teaming with a certain Robert Roode. They would soon pick up their first tag team gold together, beating LAX. Jackie was still managing Storm at this point and stayed with them throughout 2008 before quietly leaving the team and moving backstage. The team would be known as Beer Money, as Beer represented Storm and Money represented Roode. This would prove to be another epic team in TNA. I rate them slightly better than America's Most Wanted, because they had more fun, but others would disagree. Storm would continue to play a fun-loving beer drinker, and would often ride his boozer cruiser to the ring, which was a modified cooler box with beers inside. He would also wear his beer drinking helmet. Roode and Storm seemed so different in personality, but that's what made them great. Roode played the straight guy, while Storm played the funny one. Most people would probably highlight their best of 5 match with the Motor City Machine Guns as the most memorable part of Beer Money. They were also part of Ric Flair's Fortune faction, which was basically a reincarnation of the Four Horsemen, and the drinking carried on in these segments too. In 2011, Chris Harris returned to TNA, who had just returned from a brief spell in WWE as Brandon Walker, proving that WWE hired the wrong member of AMW.
Knock knock. Who's there? Braden Walker. And I'm gonna knock your brains out.
On his return, Chris Harris looked like an overweight and depressed version of Bret Hart. He would team with Matt Hardy to challenge Beer Money for the tag belts. During the match, the crowd started chanting, "Knock, knock, who's there? Brandon Walker," and Storm struggles to keep a straight face. He was thinking what all of us were. Anyway, Beer Money win, and Harris is never seen again in TNA or on TV for that matter. Unfortunately, Chris Harris had some health problems and had to take time away from professional wrestling, but he's recently made a return to the independent scene, so we wish the Wildcat the best of luck. Back to James Storm, Beer Money were on their 5th run as the TNA World Tag Team Champions, and they held the belt for 212 days, a record which was only recently beaten by Ortiz and Santana, the new LAX. The problem was, by this stage, there wasn't really any teams for them to feud with, and they lost the titles to Mexican America, a rubbish team. Storm and Roode would then enter a tournament separately to compete for the #1 contendership for the world title. Storm would lose in the tournament and would not advance to the finals, and it was clear that TNA management were behind Bobby Roode, who did advance to the finals. No one was too upset though, because either way we got a great new main eventer. But what would this mean for the Beer Money team? Well, to most people's surprise, Bobby Roode would fail to win the world title against Kurt Angle at Bound for Glory. Surprise, surprise, the internet was in outrage. The next week, James Storm would be given a chance to take on Angle for the world title. He'd beat Angle in seconds after hitting him with the last cool super kick. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the high point in James Storm's career. It was such a feel-good moment. I know there wasn't a single one of you that didn't enjoy this moment. Fortune and Bobby Roode all came out to the ring to celebrate with James Storm, and then Storm got in the crowd and celebrated with a beer bath. It felt like one of those times that TNA had got everything right. James Storm had won the title and TNA was finally learning from WCW's mistakes. They needed to create new main eventers. Everything was good in the world. 8 days later, James Storm would give his brother Bobby Roode a match for the title. The match was fought in good spirits, until Roode appeared to become more and more desperate to win. Eventually he took the chance and bashed Storm over the head with his beer bottle, and Roode would win the world title. We were all in complete shock. Storm was facing poetic justice after doing the same thing to Chris Harris 5 years earlier. Little did he know this wouldn't be the last time that beer took away his dreams. Now that Storm and Roode were enemies, we could at least look forward to the two feuding over the world title. Nope, never really happened. Storm was never really given a fair shake at taking the title from Roode. He was beaten and bloodied before matches, he was put into fatal four-ways, and when he finally did get a one-on-one match against Roode at Lockdown, he super-kicked Roode out of the cage to lose the match. The only highlight around this time was James Storm's new theme music, which was recorded by the famous country music duo Montgomery Gentry, who Storm was already drinking buddies with in the past. For the next few years, we all waited patiently for Storm to get another chance. He basically killed Roode in that match at Lockdown. Surely he should be in the #1 contenders position. Where's his rematch? We would all keep waiting. In fact, we're still waiting, as Storm would never win the world title again. For the next year, he kind of hung around, and it was around this time that Storm lost his smile. The most intriguing storyline he was involved in next was that it was insinuated that James Storm was the leader of the Aces and Eights, and in retrospect, it would have been much better for him if he had been, but no, he was completely innocent and was falsely accused. He would have been a damn good fit in that group as well. They needed some more legit stars. Next up, Storm formed a makeshift tag team with up-and-comer Gunner, and they even won the tag belts together. They weren't a bad tag team, but I don't really rate them that highly. They didn't hold the belts for long, and they were soon feuding, as Storm became a heel again for the very first time in a long time on his own. Whilst Gunner was handcuffed, Storm smashed a beer bottle over Gunner's dad's head. TNA were trying to introduce a new vicious side to his character. Following this, Storm would be seen bullying Sanada and making fun of his mentor, the Great Muta. Later, Storm was seen torturing Sanada in a hut. Storm was now a crazed cult leader who took failing wrestlers TJ Perkins, Abyss and Mahabali Shera and tried to make them better. It was completely dumb and no one was buying it. How could such a fun-loving, chilled, normal character turn into this over-the-top maniac? It's like if The Undertaker suddenly started smiling and handing out flowers on his way to the ring. It doesn't make sense. Anyway, TNA management seemed to be quite behind the idea at the time, and with Storm running his own faction, he had to be in line for a world title shot soon. He did pick up another tag belt reign with Abyss, briefly, but he was never in the world title picture. He then started feuding with Magnus for some reason. He wanted Mickie James to join the Revolution. I don't really know why. And Magnus was dating Mickie James at the time. They would soon be married. Storm would end up pushing Mickie James in front of an oncoming train, which left several people upset on the internet. Storm would then leave TNA just after, ending this pointless Revolution storyline once and for all. Storm then appeared in WWE NXT, and it looked like Storm was finally about to get his big break in professional wrestling. He wrestled 2 matches in NXT, and he got a good reception from the fans. They all seemed to know who he was. He was actually one of the first TNA wrestlers to jump to WWE. It seems like it's all the rage nowadays. Unfortunately, he didn't fare any better than his old partner Chris Harris, although at least he didn't embarrass himself and become a meme. Storm left NXT as he had a contract offer from TNA and needed the money for his family. In my opinion, his big break came much too late in life. Family will always come first. Storm then returned to TNA and told Roode he wanted to go back to having fun and drinking beer, and they reformed Beer Money. It was okay, but the magic had gone. It's a bit like whenever DX reformed, it wasn't the same. The reunion would only last 4 months. They did recapture the tag belts, but they lost them quite quickly to the Decay. And Roode left for the WWE, where he remains today. Anyway, it's clear by now the beer was lowering Storm's inhibitions and distracting him from the bigger picture once again, the world title. So now Storm's back as a single wrestler in TNA and he's a good guy. Surely the time is right with half of the TNA roster leaving to build the company around the veteran Storm. Storm won the King of the Mountain title and then took on Lashley in a winner-takes-all match for the world title, but he lost the match again after the referee missed a 3 count on Lashley. Storm would kick off and got into a war of words with Billy Corgan, the Smashing Pumpkin, who at the time was in charge of TNA. Corgan said that Storm may have a problem winning the big one. Yeah, partly right, Corgan. Storm would threaten Corgan, but he would end up getting suspended. He was then taken off TV for a bit, and returned as a new masked faction leader of the Death Crew Council. It was another terrible faction and it never went anywhere. This was a Billy Corgan idea, and when he was in control of TNA, he was behind the idea, but soon new management came into the company and they weren't interested in the DCC. They lost every big match they were involved with, and after surprisingly losing to Reno Scum and LAX, the team were disbanded. According to Storm, This storyline was supposed to lead to a big winner-takes-all match against Bobby Lashley, where Storm would finally win his world title back. TNA was then purchased by Anthem, and once TNA came back onto TV, Storm immediately demanded a world title shot. They ran a fan poll seeing if him or EC3 should get a world title shot, and Storm won, and he was set to face Bobby Lashley. But during the match he was screwed by EC3 after EC3 hit him with, guess what? A beer bottle. Classic James Storm. The two would then feud, meaning that once again James Storm had become screwed and distracted from chasing the world title. Storm's final feud in TNA was against the American Top Team, who had been hanging around and taking up so much airtime with their MMA stuff that everyone was sick of them. Lambert claimed that wrestling picked a fight with MMA, but it was the MMA team who were taking up screen time on a wrestling program. To be fair, Lambert was a good heel. Storm was the only proper TNA original left who had stuck with the company other than Abyss, and he certainly deserved a lot more for his loyalty. He challenged Dan Lambert to a loser leaves TNA match. In the match, Storm was left on his own against 8 men. They smashed Storm with, wait for it, beer bottles, of course, to knock him out for the free. This segment was vile and a horrible way for TNA legend James Storm's career to end, after he stuck true to the company since the very first episode of TNA. I refuse to ever watch this match ever again, I completely refuse. Why not have him win the world title and then retire and do something like that? Anything is better than this. Storm deserved one last happy moment with the company, but instead beer would leave Storm with nothing but regrets once again. The story behind the scenes is that TNA could no longer afford to pay Storm, who was on a wage of around $200,000 a year. Storm has now come full circle and is reunited with Billy Corgan and Jim Cornette in the rejuvenated NWA. He joins a huge host of former TNA wrestlers in NWA, but he's been unable to win the big belt from champion Nick Aldis, aka Magnus, but he's playing a similar character to the one he did in TNA, so I recommend checking NWA out. Storm is also in the best shape of his wrestling career right now. So there we go, James Storm finished his career billed as a tag team specialist after holding the NWA World Tag Team Champion 7 times and the TNA Tag Team Championship 7 times. He also held the TNA World Tag Team Championship for a combined 787 days, a record that I doubt will ever be broken. But me and you know that he could have been so much more, and he should have been. Perhaps James Storm should have laid off the beer, but instead he wakes up every morning with regrets, a feeling that I only know too well. Well, I hope I did James Storm's career a justice here. Let me know what you think down below. At what point do you think TNA should have pulled the trigger on James Storm and let him run with the world title? Do you think James Storm should have laid off the beer? And make sure you subscribe and check out my Patreon. Thanks for watching.